My name is Gianpiero Petriglieri. I'm a professor at INSEAD, and over the past 20 years, I've been researching what it means to be a good leader. And I've been trying to help people figure out what it takes to become a better leader. And there's a question that people like me who study leadership, who teach and coach people who want to get better at leading, get asked all the time. What is leadership? It's an important question, and you would like to say, it's complicated. It depends on the context, on the moment in time. But you know what? You can't. When people ask about leadership, they want a simple, an immediate, a practical answer. And so we've developed a reflex, which is to answer with a model. And there are hundreds of these leadership models in articles, in books, in videos like this. And they all look different on the surface. But when you look closer, they're all the same. They're all a version of what I call the dominant model of leadership. The dominant model usually features a story and a list. The story of a person who stands at the top of a hierarchy or in the middle of an informal circle, the kind of person who gets a lot of attention, and then the list of attributes, virtues, or skills that supposedly help that person get to that place and influence others. And the implicit promise of the dominant model is that if you display those attributes, acquire those virtues, practice those skills, you will get there too. And others will pay attention. And they will follow you. I call that the dominant model for three reasons. First, because it's extremely popular. It's popular because it makes leadership look easy, at least for some. Second, because it informs the way most of us talk about leadership, the way we write about it, the way we teach it, the way we select leaders, and ultimately the way we lead. And third, because that's what the model really describes: dominance. It teaches you that to become a leader, you need to make it to the top of a hierarchy or the center of attention and get others to do what you want. Now, let's face it, the dominant model really doesn't help. Every time we use it to make leadership easier, we end up making things worse. Why? Because if that's what we regard as leadership, if that's what we expect of leaders, we end up hiring and grooming selfish leaders, and sometimes even becoming those leaders ourselves. No wonder everywhere you look, people have a problem with leadership. Workers aren't happy with their bosses. Companies can't find enough good leaders. Surveys keep telling us that we need more and better leaders. And you know what? We won't find better leaders or get better as leaders until we ditch the dominant model and find a better picture. And here comes the good news. I have found that picture. And here's the even better news. You already know it. How do I know that you know it? Because I've made a discovery. I've discovered that if you stop asking what leadership is, and you ask people instead about their experience of leadership, you find a picture that's clearer, simpler, more realistic, more useful, and ultimately more human. And the question I've started asking is this: have you experienced good leadership? I don't mean heard about it, or read about it in a book, or watch it on TV or on YouTube. I mean you were in a room or in a virtual space and you witnessed it personally. You saw someone do something and you knew right there and then that he or she was leading you, and leading well. In fact, I'd like you to do that exercise now. Close your eyes if you want, and go back to that moment in which you were in the presence of good leadership. Where were you? Who were you with? What was happening? And most importantly, how did you know? How did you know that the person who came to your mind in that specific moment was leading? That they were leading you, that they were leading well? I want you to pay attention to your answer, to your intuition. It's likely that you didn't think, oh, I was very impressed by that person's position. And most likely, you also didn't go through a checklist of virtues and skills and said, yeah, self-awareness, tick. Teamwork, tick. Integrity, tick. Results orientation, tick. No. You probably didn't think about their position or skills at all. When I ask that question, people report something much more visceral, a much more immediate reaction. They tell me, you know what, Gianpiero? I'm fairly skeptical. I usually don't believe everything people say or promise. But in this case, with this person, I did. I knew she was the real deal. I knew I could trust him. And I'm very curious about what sets off those judgments. And you should be too, because those feelings of truth and trust are incredibly consequential. They are what makes people follow you or otherwise ignore you. One executive, for example, told me once, I knew what this person was saying maybe wasn't entirely true, but it felt real. Another person told me that in a meeting with someone she thought of as a leader, the unthinkable suddenly became imaginable. And by the way, those judgments can be wrong. Maybe 3 months later you wake up and regret bitterly that you believed that person and that you went along. And I mean, you can do great good once you start to imagine the unthinkable. Of course, you can also do some very bad stuff. But when I point that out, usually people say, no, Gianpiero, you don't get it. In this case, with this one real leader, I knew we were going to do good. And that's what I'm curious about. How did you know that they were real and good? And people shuffle a bit and then say, look, I felt it, okay? I felt something shift. I was confused and things became clear. I was invisible and I felt seen. I was scared and I felt calm. I was bored and I became excited. I was stuck and we got going. In one word, I was moved. In both senses of that word, moved. Emotionally and practically. That's how most people know that they're in the presence of leadership. We felt something and we did something. And that was good. Or at least it felt good. Now, scientifically speaking, that's a problem. If you have any kind of technical training, you will have probably attended a research methods class in which the teacher told you, if you ever have to resort to subjective descriptions of a phenomenon rather than to its objective properties, it probably means that the phenomenon doesn't exist. I mean, think about it. For a train, you never have to say, well, I know it's a train because I felt it. You can say it's a vehicle powered by electricity that moves on rail, carrying people at a maximum of 150 miles per hour, and so on and so forth. So maybe that's why everyone has their own definition of leadership and makes up their own model. Because it's subjective, it's an illusion. Leadership doesn't really exist. Oh, wait, some of you will say. There's other things in my life that have no clear definition or concrete physical properties, but I can feel them, and they move me. They might be intangible, but they're significant. Like what? Like, for example, love. Now that's a good point. And if I asked you, how do you know that love exists? I am sure you won't come up with a model. You won't be thinking of a role or a list of skills that make someone lovable. No. You immediately picture a person, a partner, a child, a siblings, a friend you love. And you know that love exists because you love somebody and because somebody loves you. And how do you know that love is real? That it's not an illusion, that you're not fooling yourself or that they're not fooling you? It's not because of what they look like or even what they say, isn't it? It's because of what you do in each other's presence. It's because you care and you show it. How? They do things for you that you didn't expect or maybe even deserve, sometimes at a personal cost. And you for them. In one word, we know that love is real when we are moved to make some sacrifices. That's how we know, beyond any doubt, that love exists. Because something moves us to act, in certain cases, for certain people, in ways that transcend transactional principles. And we call that something love. In most cultures, in fact, we consider love a kind of irrationality precisely because it moves us to do things without expectations of an immediate or commensurate reward. That's not how love works. Caring for someone we love makes us feel good. It's its own reward. And love is just like leadership, if you think about it. It's hard to define, but easy to represent. Shakespeare, for example, doesn't give you a definition of love. He just says, here, look at Romeo and Juliet. And you know it when you see it. You know Romeo and Juliet love each other. Why? Because they sacrifice everything. Social status, wealth. They sacrifice their own life for each other. I'm not saying that's a good idea, but that's how we know it. So let me put it another way. Love doesn't exist. It's a concept, an illusion, an aspiration, but lovers are real. They're tangible. In fact, when you're in love, you don't usually think about love. You think about a person, literally about somebody. Will she come out? Will he write back? Will I get a kiss? Love is real when someone shows it. And leadership is exactly the same. It's a concept, an illusion, an aspiration. Leadership doesn't exist. Leaders exist. Leadership is wishful thinking until someone acts and shows it, until someone shows up and moves you. Now, let me be clear. I'm not saying that leadership is like love. I'm saying something far more radical here. I'm saying that leadership is a kind of love, like friendship, romance, parenting. At their best, these are all concrete, credible, consistent expressions of love. And leadership is one of those too. That's why you know leadership when you feel it, when it moves you. Because that's what happens with every kind of love. That's what the leaders that you remembered did. They cared for you and for your future. And what is it that we feel in the presence of care for us and for our future? We feel safe and we feel free at once. And that makes us feel alive. When I asked you to think of a moment of leadership that you witnessed, that you were part of, I bet what you went back to was a moment in which someone showed care for you, and in their care you felt safe and free. Free from the constraints of the past, from the threat of an enemy, from the burden of oppression, from the fog of uncertainty, from the shame of failing, free to speak your mind, free to do what was right, maybe even free to leave. When you understand it that way, as a kind of love, it's easy to know when leadership is real and when it's good. It's when it keeps you safe and it sets you free. And it's easy to understand what it means to become a better leader. It means being less anxious, less possessive, and becoming more caring, more generous. Again, I'm not telling you something you didn't know. I'm just reminding you. Leadership in the models, in the books, in the slide decks is a position or a set of skills. But in the real world, in our daily lives, it's a relationship. A relationship in which we feel safer and freer than we would on our own. Or let me put it more precisely, a relationship in which we feel committed but not captive. Now, what do we do with that idea? First of all, we let it blow away our preconceptions and prejudices. Stop associating leadership with lonely fanatics who want to get to the top, to get your attention and get you to do what they want. That image puts off so many people who think, no, I'm too caring, leadership must not be for me. The opposite. You might just be the leader people have been waiting for. Second, we let that idea remind us that passion is great, but it's not enough to be a good leader. Passion can drive us, but it can make us obsessive at times, and eventually it fades. Care, on the other hand, makes us generous, and it's something that we can cultivate and expand over time. Third, if you want to be a leader, stop asking yourself, how do I move up? How do I get attention? How do I get others to do what I want? That, my friend, is seduction. It's not love. It might charm people at first, but it will breed mistrust in the long run. Ask yourself instead, what do I care about? Whose futures do I care for? Unless you can answer those questions, you're not ready to lead, because you don't know who you're leading and why. You must declare what you're trying to keep alive and who you're helping feel alive. They must know it in no uncertain terms. That's the start. Once you're ready to lead, then you need to deserve it. And you deserve it when you show that care in a concrete, credible, and consistent way. Again, think about it. What sacrifices are you making for those people and for their futures? How are you showing your commitment? How do you keep them safe and set them free? When you see leadership this way, you understand it better as a concept and you humanize it in practice. Leadership becomes more personal and at the same time less about you. You get why it's simple and why it's so hard. Because at its core, leadership isn't the practice of a model or the promotion of an idea. Leadership is a kind of love declared with courage and shown with care. And you already knew it. I've just reminded you. Now don't forget it, because if you remember that leadership is a kind of love, you will follow better leaders and become a better leader yourself.